Climb into the cockpit with pilot and Link Square's Chief Legal Officer, Tim Parill, as he invites legal leaders aboard to share advice that will help you navigate even the most turbulent times of in-house counsel work. We'll cover a range of topics from data privacy to legal team structure to public company transactions and beyond. You don't want to miss this series. Fasten your seatbelt and prepare for takeoff. You're listening to Cockpit Counsel.
Welcome back, everybody. My name is Tim Parill, and this is Cockpit Counsel. Today, I've got Brady Broadbent with me, who is a partner at Sorenson Capital. Brady, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
No problem. So we start out every single episode asking about your pre-flight ritual. Brady, what is your pre-flight ritual?
Yeah, my pre-flight ritual is to get on the flight and make it to my destination. Somehow that doesn't always happen. But,
exactly.
I'm one of the AirPod users that kind of dials in, and I used to be an aisle person and now I'm a window person, Flights are an interesting experience for me. It's something I try not to do as much as I used to, which is good. but yeah, I'm an AirPod guy.
Yeah, that's the way to be. What made you make the switch to the window?
That's a good question. I actually find that if I'm on the aisle, the number of hits with the cart is well into the double digits, right?
Yeah.
So, I just figure pack it in, stay there, ride it out,
Yeah, I like it so I can sleep.
Yeah.
That's usually something to lean up against as opposed to like poor person in the middle.
That's right. Yeah, that's right.
So tell me a little bit about your background. How did you find your way to Sorenson?
Yeah, so I started my career actually in this town right here as a consultant.
Nice.
And was doing all kinds of problem solving for companies, which was fantastic training. And I kind of got to a point where it's like, okay, I need to either benefit from or pay the price for my decisions, right? My analysis. So I went from there and got into the investment world right before the 2008 disaster, which was a horrible and yet awesome time to become an investor. I then actually went to business school back in the Boston area and started a company while I was here, which was a technology platform for healthcare clinics. And that experience combined with my sort of pre-schooling investment work helped me to have the skill sets to go back to the investment world, which I initially did about 10 years ago. So anyway, that's a little bit of the background.
How was it getting into specifically the VC area? Did you have like a large ramp time? Were there certain things about it that maybe you didn't expect?
Yeah, it's a good question. So the remarkable thing about most businesses is that there are 2 or 3 fundamental drivers of success. And they're not always the same, but they're usually very similar. And so for me, one of the things I love about my work is once you figure out those key levers in a given company, it's pretty straightforward. You have a lot of difficult decisions to make, but it's pretty straightforward as to the pathway to create value.
Yeah.
So for me, that transition was a lot of consistent principles and then trying to figure out, okay, so where can I push really hard without breaking a company to create value fast? And I love that. That's a very unique experience to have.
That's awesome. So let's start. Let's get into it a little bit. I guess more tactically.
Yeah.
When you are first deciding on whether you're going to invest, you hear the pitch. You say, "I really like this." You start in with the due diligence process. What are your interactions like with the company at that point? Like obviously during the pitch, there's questioning, there's like sort of business, like initial due diligence. All right, what are we really looking for? And is this the type of company we want to invest in? Is this the type of team we want to invest in? But when you've made that investment decision, but maybe you haven't closed the round yet, what are some things that are at the top of your mind that you're looking at, maybe that might change your opinion of the deal?
Yeah, so I'll kind of take this in 2 parts. One, prior to a term sheet, right?
Yep.
I'm trying to answer all the key questions that are going to get me to a but for yes on the investment, right?
Right.
So that really falls into two buckets for me. The first is product and product leadership specifically. So what I'm looking for is there a product for a given target customer profile that is the no-brainer solution in that space?
Right.
Doesn't mean there's not competition, doesn't mean there isn't other alternatives. It does mean that for that customer group, this is the answer.
Okay.
And that's a lot of time with the team. It's a lot of time with customers, a lot of time with sort of market participants to understand the positioning of that product. So that is a big area, number one. Number two is sort of the second piece. So in my mind, there are two major risks to the performance of any B2B software company, which is where we invest.
Right.
The first is product and product leadership.
Yep.
And a great team, a great founder team, has built a product that's very well positioned and is solving a great problem. The other big risk, though, is getting that product to market in an efficient way.
Yep.
And so what we're trying to figure out is, for that particular customer profile, has the company demonstrated the ability to repeatedly sell in an efficient way?
Right.
And there's a lot of tools and capabilities that we've built internally to kind of figure that out and hopefully help the company plow the field for future success.
Right.
But those are the two areas that we go really deeply. And if we find really good answers there, then we'll go thumbs up on the investment.
Right.
Post term sheet, you're really looking for gotchas that you hadn't gotten to pre diligence, and usually that's in the form of legal diligence and sort of the deeper financial review and those types of things. And it's really kind of making sure the stage is set, you've got all the context going into the investment. So
at the term sheet stage, are you primarily working directly with the in-house attorney for if there is one, or the team of attorneys, or are you sort of channeling that through your outside counsel?
Yeah, so on our end, we have a group of attorneys that we'll use on a repeated basis.
Yep.
So frankly, it feels very much like an in-house team because we're constantly using them, right?
Right.
So yeah, at the term sheet stage, essentially, I'll kind of know what the general terms are that I want.
Right.
And I'll reach out to those folks and just have them pull together a term sheet along those lines. Yeah. That's generally what happens at the term sheet stage.
And do you all tend to keep your term sheets relatively consistent, or is there a pretty wide variation depending on type of business, stage of business, amount of investment?
Yeah, generally pretty consistent.
Yeah.
Yeah. We are looking for growth-driven returns, growth-driven outcomes.
Right.
Consequently, there's not a whole lot of movement as it relates to kind of the nature of the term sheet.
So when you are interacting with the portfolio or potential portfolio companies counsel, what are some of the things you're thinking about? How are you still evaluating at that point? Is the due diligence process an evaluation of the team as a whole? How are you thinking about that, or is it very much more transactional for you?
Yeah, no, there's always team evaluation, right? At every stage of the process, you're trying to figure out, and a lot of it is, where are my strengths?
Right.
Where are my weaknesses? Any company that's growing as fast as the companies that we invest in are growing is constantly adding resources, hiring and supporting and expanding the capability of the organization.
Right.
So what I'm really trying to do is understand where my strong suits are, what my capabilities are, and where are the areas we've got to make sure that we can bolster over time. But all the time.
Yeah, that's an interesting point of view. Like, it's I think about it in terms of like the first 90 days at a job, where everything that you do is kind of like part of an extended interview.
Yeah.
Right? It's an interesting perspective, and I think it's an important one for attorneys maybe who are going through their first couple of rounds of financing, particularly if you're in-house. Like, understand that it's an interview, but I feel like you're probably being interviewed for things that are a little bit different than maybe just like how good of a lawyer are you?
Right.
And so, would be interested in hearing from you, like, yes, maybe somebody is proving to be a good lawyer, but are they negotiating effectively? And does that, like, how does their approach to a negotiation, for example, of the term sheet, color your view?
Yeah.
Right. It just like it's an interesting dynamic. Having gone through a number of rounds of financing, there's always in the back of my mind, there's always this like, okay, like I need to negotiate, and I can negotiate in a couple of different ways, and I need to figure out which one's going to be effective to get what the company needs out of this term sheet.
Right.
But I need to do it in a way that doesn't, I think, leave a bad taste in the mouth of the investor.
Yes.
So there's always a little bit of a line to walk there, but would love to get your perspective on, is there a line that can be crossed, and what does that line look like?
Yeah. So I think it's generally understood that in any negotiation, both sides need to have a win.
Right.
They need to have an outcome that's maybe better than the starting point. Right.
Right.
And that's great. And there's a lot of zone of agreement. The problems come when one side or the other starts to think that this is a one-time game.
Yeah.
As soon as your mindset goes to this is a one-time game, it's regardless of whether you win the negotiation
right.
or lose, you will have lost.
Right.
And I try really hard to keep that mindset because, in any interaction in most careers, it's not a one-time game, right?
Right.
And you're building for the longer term. On the flip side, right, if I take the approach of I've got to win on every single point, I've lost, even
right.
if I've won. And that's a really important mentality to keep, especially as you have challenges that inevitably come in any company, in any partnership, right? You've got to set the stage for success in dealing with those inevitable issues. And the wrong way to do that is to punch somebody in the nose from the get-go, right?
Exactly.
So yeah, I mean, it is something that, you start to think, gosh, is this going to be this rough? If it's been rough the whole time.
Yeah.
So my advice to anybody in that position is like, hey, yeah, there's going to be things that are important to you, but you got to recognize the ultimate goal here is to set the stage for a good partnership.
Yeah.
That's ultimately what you're trying to accomplish. Right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think about it in terms of a lot of outside attorneys that I've used throughout my career, and I will continue to use throughout my career, where there are certain of them who what makes them so good at what they do also makes them very challenging to deal with.
Yeah, sure.
Right. And, I have a particular litigation partner in mind who is just incredible. Like just easily the most electric litigator I've ever come across even in the movies, like quite frankly, like seeing him argue a case, you feel like you're watching a movie, which if you've ever spent any appreciable amount of time in court, it's very, very, very rarely like the movies, right?
Yeah.
It's pretty different, except when you're watching this guy, and maybe there are a few others as well. But then like negotiating the bills with him is a real pain in the butt, right?
Yeah, sure.
So, when I think about like how do you set that impression and build that relationship, it's like the relationship and your ability to build a relationship is, I think, speaks to the competency of the lawyer, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's like, again, it's not good enough just to be right on the law or to win that position. I mean, obviously you're going to have, as a business, you're going to have things that that are hard stops for you. Like maybe I'm not going to accept a 2x liquidation preference, or
Sure.
maybe I'm not going to, accept like a particular IRR, right?
Sure.
Something like that. That's a fundamental business issue at the end of the day. That's not, a legal issue per se.
Right.
And so like focusing on those relationships, I think, is really important. And so I kind of want to keep going down sort of that relationship avenue. Now, you go through the negotiation or get to the term sheet, term sheet's done, go through the due diligence, follow-up diligence, all of that done, you fund.
Yep.
Now, you usually take a board seat, right?
Typically, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, if we're leading.
So how do you approach then, now having been on opposite sides of effectively a transaction, now to being on the same side?
Yeah.
And what have you found of attorneys that have been successful versus ones maybe who are less successful? What are some of the traits of success, and from your perspective as an investor, what are you looking for from that attorney now that you're on the board and you're sort of in the company?
Yeah, it's really interesting, and it's a little bit of a balance, right? So if you got somebody that you're negotiating with pre-close, that then becomes your partner post-close, that person is very wise to have approached that negotiation, as we just discussed, in a thoughtful way. So if you're coming into that board dynamic with that person now being on the same side of the table, hopefully there's been good interactions despite the negotiation,
right?
That have led to that point. So yeah, what am I looking for? I'm looking for somebody who can, let me back up. As an investor, what I'm trying to do in helping my company succeed is look around the corner to what's coming. That might be sales and marketing metrics. That might be pace of hiring. That might be cost structure. That might be product, whatever it might be that the company's working on. If I can help look around the corner and use experience to make good decisions today that are going to impact the company in 6, 9, 12 months, that is going to be the most effective. In the same way, I like to see a general counsel who takes the perspective of looking ahead from a risk perspective and saying, okay, listen, these are the things that we're going to want to be thinking about in these aspects of the organization. Because frankly, there's very few people in the room that have that type of perspective or experience to do that. Yeah. And if that person especially can take certainly a legal contextual view and layer on top of that a pragmatic, practical perspective, that's a great combination, right? So that's kind of what you hope to see, is somebody who can have the perspective and context that others in the room don't have, and be able to help the organization be really forward thinking and thoughtful as it relates to those types of topics. So anyway, it's a similar set of principles to kind of how I would expect an independent or an investor board member to operate. Yeah. That will help general counsels to drive value as well.
Makes a ton of sense. Generally, how many of your portfolio companies at the time that you invest, you're typically Series B, Series C?
Yes. Yep.
On average, how many have an in-house legal function?
Yeah, usually it has not been created yet.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. That's not always the case, but usually it hasn't been created yet. And over the course of growth and expansion, it is created. Yeah. So yeah, it's kind of an interesting dynamic, but it's something that really helps. You come into an organization as either an investor or what have you, board member, and there's a lot of different topics you're thinking about. Yeah. And it's really nice over time to be able to have experts be able to kind of help in some of those areas, right? As the business is growing and accelerating. So yeah, usually it's something that's added as a company gets a little bit more mature, a little bit later stage. Yeah. But it can be a tremendously positive resource.
And how involved for the organizations that don't have in-house legal when you join? Yeah. Typically, you're looking at someone who's at least an SVP level, usually coming in. Yeah. If not a bona fide C level exec. How much interaction do you have? Do you participate in the interview process? Do you help advise the CEO? And what are some of those conversations like?
Yeah, certainly. Generally speaking, with any C-level hire, a board member can provide a great alternative viewpoint. Yeah. Because it's not full-time. I'm not working full-time with that individual. But I can provide a perspective as to, again, the core capabilities of the management team as a whole, and where different team members can lift the team collectively. Right. And so, yeah, generally speaking, engaged in the interview process and kind of providing a perspective. And a lot of times it's like, again, you're looking for somebody who has the context of the whatever the applicable law structure is for that company.
Yep.
And can layer onto that the practical dynamics of how fast a company is growing.
Right.
And somebody who's coming at it, who's worked with a lot of attorneys on documentation, a lot of attorneys as it relates to an exit process,
Right.
and a lot of dynamics in between, you can help with some of that filtering for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about your perspective. So one of the things that I always find interesting is that every single board meeting, and quite frankly, every single conversation with the board member that is representing an investor, is that perspective is something that I very rarely can tune into. Like, you always come at it from sort of this investment perspective. Obviously, there's operational perspectives layered into that because you get to know the company well enough, and
Yeah, sure.
and the industry well enough, and so on and so forth. But what are some maybe some inside baseball that you can give for attorneys to be able to understand sort of your perspective? What are your concerns?
Yeah.
Right. Like even as far as when do you have to go talk to your partners about something that's going on with one of your portfolio companies, and what does that do to you?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Sure.
Like I just think about it in terms of like, well, I don't know why this board member is really pushing this point so hard, because operationally to me, this really doesn't seem that important.
Sure.
But it's obviously very important to this person. Like, getting some understanding as to that background would be really helpful.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So if I, whenever I invest $1, right, in a given company that's got a product or what have you, the context that I bring is that $1 I want to be worth more in the
Right.
future, right? And so contextually, what I'm trying to understand is what are the key inputs to the determination of what that $1 will be worth in the future.
Okay.
So if I'm a member of the management team, I'm going to have an area of the business that I'm thinking about as it relates to operations, and I'm thinking about, okay, how do I do this better?
Right.
But the perspective I'm trying to bring is put all of that together into the same box.
Right.
What are the things that need to be happening collectively to increase the value of the $1?
Yep.
And that often will highlight different priorities or different perspectives across the chasm of operational issues.
Yeah.
That become the bigger bigger drivers of value.
Okay.
And when I say drivers of value, I mean the value of that $1, right? That I put in. And so consequently, what I'm looking for is in that given business, there may be 3 or 4 things ultimately that will drive the outcome, that will drive the fundamental value of the business in the future.
Right.
And so my perspective as I'm listening to different departmental overviews or, going through the materials is, okay, so what are the things that should be improved or grown or expanded? And then what are the things that are must improvements?
Right.
Or must areas of focus to drive value specifically.
Right.
And so a lot of times what results is comments or conversation that go above maybe the specific topic at hand to say, okay, well, this relates to value creation in this way.
Okay.
We've had conversations like that as in our board, right?
Yep.
Where it's like, okay, yes, there's a lot of important things that are happening,
Right.
but here are the things that we will be judged on in the future.
Yep.
And we have to manage to specifically. And then what are the derivative levers we can pull to lift those metrics or lift those drivers?
Right.
So that's the mentality that I come with is trying to filter through all of the things we could do and make sure that the things that we must do to drive value are prioritized.
Right.
So now to go to the second part of your question, right? When I make an investment, I'm making inherent assumptions as to what those key drivers of value are.
Mm-hmm.
And a couple of things can happen. One, those assumptions could be wrong.
Right.
Meaning that it's actually that the value creation process is actually going to be driven by different things.
Okay.
And that's often an opportunity for me to talk to my partners and say, hey, the premise is actually different, or the premise was different than what reality is.
Right.
as far as what the key drivers of value are. Alternatively, you got the value drivers right.
Yeah.
But we're not achieving them.
Right.
You know how you're going to be graded, but you got a bad grade.
Right. And is that typically an execution issue, or is it something where maybe your drivers are I don't know, influenced by factors outside of the management team's control?
Yeah, it's general. It could be either. There's always ways to execute better. That's the bottom line, right? And so we work together and do our best, right, to get the best outcome we can. And that's a constant effort of trying to get the most you can out of your board, right?
Right.
That's another topic we talk about. But the board should be providing insight and perspective to help the company, achieve a great grade on whatever those value drivers are.
Right.
But alternatively, it could be a scenario where you've got a technology shift, you've got a market change, you've got a change in buyer behavior, you've got a macro event, whatever it might be,
right,
that comes in and changes the equation. And despite great execution, the equation's changed, and so things need to move. But in any of those circumstances, our partnership tries to be really deliberate and diligent and kind of keeping the dialogue going. My partners have great experience, and so I also want to be able to get their best thinking for the benefit of the company, right? On areas that we can improve. But yeah, I generally speaking, a lot of it just boils down to, are we measuring the right things? Are we judging ourselves on the right metrics?
Yep.
If we are, let's just perform well. If we're not, then let's change our paradigm and start to measure the things that matter most.
Right.
The other thing I would say is most organizations go through an evolution of the metrics and the key drivers of success that they're paying attention to.
Yeah.
And I would say the best teams are really good at determining those 3 or 4 key drivers.
Yep.
Measuring to those, and as change occurs, which it inevitably does, focusing, adjusting the metrics or the evaluation criteria that they use. So anyway, for what it's worth.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense, and I think that's a great perspective that oftentimes attorneys, I'm sure you've seen it, attorneys just sit in boardrooms and take notes.
Yeah,
right?
Sure.
Like, well, I'm the company secretary. It's like, well, you got to contribute. Like,
yeah, sure.
You can't just take notes, but having that understanding that you're coming at it from a metrics driven perspective, I think is really, really important, and it should it should trickle down to all parts of the business. I know, at least here at Link Squares, everything is metrics driven.
Yeah.
Everything, like the way that the legal function is run is metrics driven just as much as the go to market motion is.
Yeah.
Right? So you made reference though to sort of structuring the board meeting and what role the board should play for the management team.
Yeah.
Would really love to get your perspective on how an effective management team should be, utilizing the board.
Yeah, great question. So yeah, I would say it's very common for management teams to engage with the board around a singular purpose, and that is board reporting, right? So the management team will report out kind of the progress to the board, and that's certainly an important part of the board's function.
Sure.
But great management teams will view their board as a resource for improvement and growth and expansion, and will approach the discussion certainly from a reporting function, but also in a way that allows the board to contribute.
Yeah.
So, what are the 2 or 3 things that each department head is thinking about or noodling on or stuck on?
Right.
What are the key perspectives that would be most helpful in managing the next, 30, 60, 90 days?
Right.
And facilitating a discussion where they can extract from the board relevant experience, perspective, background.
Yeah.
That's going to drive internalization of that experience, right?
Right.
So yes, report, but use the discussion to extract that perspective and value. And I think when the discussion is just as much Q&A going both directions, you can have a great dynamic.
Absolutely.
There's plenty of questions from board members to the management team.
Right.
But if the management team can kind of use it as an opportunity to ask questions of the board and extract perspective, it can be very productive. So anyway, that those are a few of the things that I've seen be most effective.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense, and honestly, it makes for an easier board meeting. Like, it's really stressful to walk into a board meeting and be like, I need to give an update, and then let the board pepper me with questions.
Right.
Because if you're just basically doing a business report, like, hey, look at how great we are, let me know if you want to talk about anything, you're gonna get questions. They may or may not be things that are important to the business, or most important to the business, or top of mind what you're thinking about. Like, I think we've done a good job of making strides in that direction of like, okay, how are we getting the best insight from Brady and the rest of the board members, and how are we taking that back to our teams and saying, all right, this is how we need to be thinking about the business. It's a meaningful shift, I think, that we've had to undergo as a management team here.
Yeah, and it's very common, right?
Yeah.
As an organization grows up, that the nature of that dialogue shifts. But yeah, the other thing I've seen that's been effective is, there may be one topic that's really relevant right now.
Right.
And so let's allocate, half of the board meeting, for sake of example, to go really deep on that particular topic.
Right.
And we've seen that, right?
Yep.
And depending upon the nature of the circumstances, but a well-orchestrated discussion can go a long way.
Yeah, absolutely. So one more question for you before we get to, I know we've got a couple of questions from folks that are watching. Would love to hear a horror story from the boardroom.
I would say, that's a good question. I would say, the I'll call it a lecture, sort of the lecture from the management team over, 250 slides.
Yeah.
Over 6 or 7 hours. You get to that
sounds like a horror story, no matter what the content is.
Sometimes I feel bad for a management team that's got that much, but there's a point at which you have to balance the detail, right? There's a lot of ongoing operational opportunities and challenges, and so that's the balance that you've got to strike. But I think that as in most things, the greatest companies learn how to continuously improve with rapid cycles of improvement.
Right.
And the same goes for a board, right?
Okay.
To the extent that a board can improve over time and optimize the discussion and optimize the reporting and the metrics and so forth, it only helps. So that would be my biggest feedback is like, any board dynamic that you or your listeners are in, try to drive to continuous improvement, whether it's the way the schedule runs or what's reported or the dialogue. But my hope is that, there's fewer 7-hour, 250 slide deck reviews and more dialogue around the key drivers of success.
Yeah, absolutely. And one very important thing is always schedule more time for each section than you think you need.
Yeah.
No matter what.
Right. I think that's right.
Awesome. Well, Alyssa, what do we have?
This one's actually on theme with time management. What time management tips do you have for busy leaders?
Okay. This is a great question. So I have gone through most approaches on this in my career. There's a certain benefit of writing a list down and physically crossing something off the list. It's real,
Oh yeah.
That wasn't as effective for me. I used different software platforms. What I ended up with, to show my geekiness here a little bit, is a very structured Excel sheet.
Okay.
That I reference every single day. And although I can't physically cross something off, the delete key works pretty well.
It does.
To get rid of stuff. It does. But I've found that bucketed to-dos and prioritized to-dos helps me a lot.
Yeah.
And just being able to get a particular to-do out of my brain onto a sheet helps a lot. And then I can come back and say, okay, what are the most important things today that I've got to do?
Yeah.
So anyway, that's where I landed.
Reducing it to writing helps crystallize exactly the issue that you need to do too.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, that's a great question.
Good question.
What are your predictions for 2023 in the VC world?
Oh man. How much time do we have?
we have approximately 3.5 hours left.
Yeah.
So.
Man, that's a tough one. Yeah, we're in an interesting market right now. And what I will say is great companies will do well.
Yeah.
Companies that have got a great product, that are getting that product into the hands of customers in an effective way, will do well. So, there's always challenges, and the concept of continuous improvement is really important. In this market, you've got to kind of constantly be watching where things are going. Mm-hmm. But again, great businesses, good market, bad market, have got a great product and customers that are satisfied, and they're responsible with their resources and treat those resources with respect as it relates to their cash and spending and so forth. So, I think 2023 will be as exciting as 2022, I'm sure.
Right.
And we'll see how it goes.
Let's hope it's exciting in a different way.
Yeah.
Great. How about this? If you were to give your 20-year-old self one piece of advice, what would it be?
Oh, man. My 20-year-old self. I think, and I apologize for repeating myself, but one of the things that I've learned over the course of my career is kind of a two-edged sword that's the same principle, and that is execution, or the ability to prioritize tasks and get them done.
Yeah.
Learn how to execute. Learn how to prioritize, diagnose a problem, and execute the solution.
Yep. Is
really, really critical. And it really separates great leaders from, folks that are maybe less effective. So execution is really key. And I would probably tell myself, learn how to learn and to do.
Right.
And the flip side of that, or maybe the other side of that, is learn how to continuously improve.
Right.
Learn how to evaluate what went well this week, this month, this quarter, this year, and to figure out ways to make that better. And it doesn't have to be a revolutionary improvement, but small improvements over time.
Yeah.
Consistent focus on being better than you were yesterday.
Yep.
is a very I think great way to go about a career or life or what have you.
Yeah, absolutely.
My 20-year-old self, I'm sure, was a disaster, but hopefully we can all just improve a little bit each day.
Yeah, absolutely. Do we have anything else, Alyssa, or is that it?
We can do one more.
All right.
What's one of the best investments you've ever made?
That's a great question. One of the best investments I ever made was actually, and I don't mean this to come off the wrong way, but investing in myself. And I think everybody needs to take this mindset as it relates to your own education, building your skill set, how you interact with people, sort of this concept we started with around, do you approach life as a one-time game?
Right.
Or do you approach it as an opportunity to, yes, have a great outcome, but, be a good person along the way.
Right.
So I think, investing in your own capabilities, I was fortunate enough to co-found a company with a couple of other great people. And, that was kind of betting on yourself.
Yeah.
And that was a phenomenal experience as well. So yeah, hopefully those types of investments pay off better than any monetary investment. So
yeah, absolutely. Well, Brady, thanks so much for your time. Really appreciate you taking the time to sit here today and talk for a little while. It's been awesome. Really great conversation. So thank you. Appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yep. All right, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. Please like us, follow us on all the socials, and we'll see you next time.